Welcome everyone. Happy Puerto Rican Heritage Month. And we welcome you to this virtual program. My name is Amanda Davis. I'm the project manager of the New York City LGBT Historic Sites Project. And this event, From Loisaida to the South Bronx, Puerto Rican LGBTQ culture in New York City, features two guest speakers, Charles Rice-González and Andrés Santana-Miranda, who we'll get to in a bit. And I just want to start out with a little introduction about our project and who we are, and then look at some sites that we have on the website connected to Puerto Rican culture. So we've been around almost 10 years now, lots of ups and downs in the world since we kicked off in 2015, but we're still here and still documenting LGBTQ history, where it happened, where it's still happening, and throughout the city's 5 boroughs, with our earliest site dating to the 17th century. And this is the interactive map on our website, which you can filter in several ways, as you see on the left. And you can click on any pin and learn about its connection to LGBTQ history. And we really wanted to show the community's impact on American history and culture throughout the centuries and in many different fields. And there are a lot of pins on the map, almost 500. We're still adding more. But another way for you to see the kind of content that we share is through these thematic collections that we've created on the website. And these are just 9 examples. The Hispanic heritage theme, obviously strong connections to tonight's program. And these give you an idea of the kinds of stories that we tell and themes that we cover throughout the LGBTQ community's very long and diverse history in New York City. And another aspect of our work beyond the website is to expand the number of LGBTQ historic sites on the National Register of Historic Places. The National Register is the federal government's honorary list of historic sites that tell the story of America. And for a very long time, that only told a very limited story. And we're working for our part to increase the number of LGBTQ sites on the National Register for New York City. And that currently includes 11 individual sites and 1 historic district listed earlier this year, Greenwich Village. And we're working on 2 more, the Jaffe Art Theater and the Hotel Chelsea. And some other ways that we get our content out there and raise awareness of this history is through this free digital guide that we've created on the Bloomberg Connects app that you can take self-guided walking tours, hear from the people who made history. And we also have walking tours and trolley tours like this one at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. We hold those every year. And we also have things like plaque unveilings that you see here at Julius's Bar in Greenwich Village. And a lot of people know us through our Instagram feed, and that's where we share snippets of LGBTQ history pretty much daily based on content from our website. These are some examples of reels that we've shared this year. We also partner with different cultural groups and institutions around the city and sometimes around the country to help spread awareness of this history. And so tonight's talk is From Loisaida to the South Bronx, Puerto Rican LGBTQ culture in New York City. This is the second of 3 virtual programs we're hosting this fall as part of our intergenerational speaker series, The Historian and the Activist, Cross-Cultural LGBTQ New York. Our first program that focused on fighting for LGBTQ inclusion at the annual St. Patrick's Day Parade is now on YouTube if you didn't get a chance to attend that one. And we hope you'll join us for our final program in this series on December 3rd, Silence Equals Death, Reclaiming the Pink Triangle in AIDS-Era New York. And one of the original designers of this iconic poster will be one of the speakers at this event. We also want to thank Humanities New York, who, with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, made this event possible and this free event possible through their action grant. So thank you very much, Humanities New York. And before we move on to our guest speakers, I just wanted to give you an idea of some of the sites that we feature on our website. And for this program tonight, looking at Puerto Rican LGBTQ New York. And I include a little screenshot on the upper right of our search bar on the website, just another way that you can search for more specific things that you have in mind. In this case, I typed in Puerto Rican, or Puerto Rico, or Antonia Pantoja in this case, and you'll get a list of sites related to that. So just another way to sort through all the information that we have. But Antonia Pantoja, for many reasons, is a great person to start with tonight. 80 years ago this very month in November 1944, Antonia Pantoja was part of the first wave of Puerto Rican migration to New York City. And from the late 1950s until 1969, she lived in the Morningside Gardens complex, which is the part of the building, or the building that you see at left. Pantoja was especially influential in building institutions that helped the city's Puerto Rican community, and she was most proud of her work with the nonprofit Aspira and its mission to educate and provide leadership opportunities for Puerto Rican youth. And she's seen here on the right with her surviving partner, activist and professor, Dr. Wilhelmina Perry, who RSVP'd to this program tonight. So if she's here later on, would love to hear from her. And I also want to thank the Center for Puerto Rican Studies for sharing their incredible photo collection and research archives with us. A number of sites on our website benefit from their incredible archive. And we've also mapped the Washington Heights residence of Manuel Ramos Otero, who is widely regarded as one of the most important openly gay Puerto Rican writers of the 20th century. And he focused on topics such as race, sexuality, feminism, and colonialism. He wrote almost half of his work in this apartment while living here from 1983 to 1990, before returning to Puerto Rico, where he soon after died of AIDS-related complications, and when he was only 42 years old. And here he is on the right at the Hudson River Piers in the late 1970s. Our project also includes the longtime home of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in Loisaida, which is Spanglish for Lower East Side. I'm sure many of you are aware. And the cafe has been located here since 1981, but was founded in 1973. And its founders were predominantly Puerto Rican, including two gay men, poet and writer Miguel Algarin and poet and playwright Miguel Piñero. And the cafe first provided a voice for the Puerto Rican experience in the United States through performance and graphic art, and has since expanded to include other underrepresented artists. And I should say that all the sites I'm talking about tonight have much more in-depth histories on our website. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of each. On our map, you'll also find the 1980s studio and residence of fashion illustrator Antonio Lopez and art director Juan Ramos on Union Square West. They met at FIT in 1961 and were in a relationship for 7 years. And out of that grew a business partnership that lasted nearly 30 years when Lopez died of an AIDS-related illness at just 44 years old in 1987. And actually, they both succumbed to AIDS, unfortunately. But part of their legacy was reinvigorating the art of fashion illustration at a time when the fashion industry was moving more and more towards photography to advertise the latest styles. And you see at the right here an illustration by Lopez that appeared in British Vogue in 1968. And I also want to thank the estate of Antonio Lopez and Juan Ramos for providing a lot of great illustrations that we feature on our website. And we've also mapped the one-time film studio of Homoficiones, the city's first Latina LGBTQ public access television program. It moved to this building near Madison Square Park in 1995 and was here for 5 years. Homoficiones covered LGBTQ issues for Spanish-speaking audiences, and its co-founders included Puerto Rican AIDS activists. Here are two up top, Candido Negron and Hector Seda, interviewing Miguel Algarin. And then the photo below is a segment called Lesbovisiones, which was produced and hosted by Latina lesbians, including women from the group Las Buenas Amigas. We also document places of homophobic hate crimes and discrimination, like this street sign in Jackson Heights, Queens, which remembers Julio Rivera, a bartender who was murdered nearby in 1990 for being gay. And this was a real watershed moment for LGBTQ activism in Queens. An organized response by groups like the Anti-Violence Project and Queer Nation ultimately led to Rivera's case being the first gay hate crime to be tried in New York State. And it also helped inspire the formation of the Queens Pride Parade, and you see a photo of that at right. And that began in 1993. And the goal of that event was to make LGBTQ people more visible in their home borough and not just in places like Greenwich Village. Our project also, of course, includes bars and nightlife spaces, including Friends Tavern, which is also in Jackson Heights and is co-owned by Eddie Valentin, who was born in Puerto Rico. Friends opened in 1989 and is the oldest active gay bar in Queens. And then there's La Escuelita in Manhattan, which was especially popular with Latino and Black gay and bisexual men and trans women. The club had several locations, but was here at 39th Street and 8th Avenue in Manhattan from the late 1970s until it closed in 2016 after years of harassment by the state liquor authority. That's a common theme on our website dating back decades. And finally, we've mapped the Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance, or BAAD, the original location on Beretta Street in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx. It was founded in 1998 by choreographer Arthur Aviles, pictured with his hand in the air in the center, and activist and writer Charles Rice-González. But I'm not going to go too much into this one because we have Charles here as one of our guest speakers. And so on that note, I'd like to introduce both. Andrés Santana-Miranda is project coordinator in the Historic Buildings and Sites Division at Cencor, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the conservation and restoration of Puerto Rico's cultural heritage. He also consults for our project, where his research efforts focus on historic places connected to the Latina and Spanish-speaking community, including some of the sites I just shared. So thank you, Andres. He has a Bachelor of Environmental Design from the University of Puerto Rico and an MS in Historic Preservation from Columbia University. And Charles Rice-González is a writer and longtime Bronx LGBTQ activist and co-founder of the Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance and an assistant professor at Hostess Community College, CUNY. His debut novel, Chulito, has received awards and recognitions from the American Library Association and the National Book Critics Circle. And he's the chair of the board for the Bronx Council on the Arts and the National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures, and serves on the advisory board of the Macondo Writers Workshop. And actually, one of our graduate student interns this past summer was able to speak with Charles about LGBTQ sites in the Bronx. So we're very grateful to him as well for sharing his memories of these places so we can work to add more of those on the website and get more representation for the Bronx. So now I'm going to hand it over to Andres.
I hope y'all can hear me well. First of all, thank you, Amanda, for the introduction and project also for considering me and for having this initiative as well to just have this conversation with Charles on Puerto Rican LGBTQ sites in New York City and exploring some of the legacies of some of these sites. Before I get into the pictures, the few pictures that I have for tonight, I just briefly want to mention that going to briefly get a little bit into the history of migration of the Puerto Rican community, just so we can understand better how it contextualizes as well with the presence of the Puerto Rican LGBTQ community in New York City. So let me share, and I hope you all can see my screen. Okay, perfect. So basically, we first have to understand that migration to New York City from Puerto Rico happened ever since the mid 19th century, when Puerto Rico was still a colony, territory, or province, however you prefer to call it, of the Spanish crown. Most of this migration was from education, commerce, or in some cases, towards the late 19th century, political exiles. Then we have the sovereignty switch, so to say, in 1898 when the United States acquired Puerto Rico after the Spanish-Cuban American War of that same year. And that led to a slow increase in migration throughout those first years of the 20th century. Already by 1910, there were over 1,000 Puerto Ricans living in the United States in general. Uh, okay. But then by 1917, things start to change when the United States Congress granted citizenship to Puerto Rico. This, we have to understand that it was also in the context of World War One, so there were various implications for that to happen as well. But at the time, Puerto Rico was also facing a lot of poverty. So this citizenship also facilitated movement over from the island to the United States, particularly to New York City. And this, in basically in 3 years, we noticed that already 45 states in the United States had Puerto Rican citizens living in their areas. So it went from a mere 1,000 people over to 45 states already reporting Puerto Ricans. And I'm jumping from 1920 to 1940s. It's a big jump, but it's just to briefly explain it because this is a big topic. And already in 1940, we have 60,000 Puerto Ricans living only in New York City. Uh, Basically, between the 20s and 40s, because of the restrictions that the US Congress was placing for immigration from Europe, it was easier for Puerto Rican workers to have jobs in the United States. And so this facilitated also migration from the island. But basically, there was a shift in terms of migration in that post World War II context when the Puerto Rican government engineered and institutionalized what is known here as Operación Manos a la Obra, also known in English as Operation Bootstrap, which was the mission to industrialize Puerto Rico's economy away from agriculture. This helped better the quality of life in some aspects, but in other cases, it also contributed to higher unemployment rates because the industries weren't offering sufficient jobs for the population, and there was overpopulation as well. So a lot of people from outer towns that lost their jobs in agriculture were moving over to San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico, weren't finding jobs, had faced overcrowding in certain areas, didn't have housing, proper housing either. So then some families and individuals started to treat San Juan basically as a trampoline over to uh, the United States, including New York City. Well, it was in this context that the government started to consider the migration as a safety valve or as a solution to that overpopulation and the unemployment rates, and started to establish migration division offices through the Department of Labor of the Puerto Rican government, basically to orient and help these Puerto Rican workers and families to either find proper employment and also to settle in places where there was already an existing Puerto Rican community. So I mentioned 1940, over 60,000 Puerto Ricans living in New York City. By 1950, it more than doubles to 187,000 Puerto Rican citizens living in New York City. And then by 1960s, we have over 600,000 Puerto Rican citizens living in New York City, almost reaching the million in 1970. Um, After that, it's just began to decline because people have been going to other states and even countries as well. But now this also brings the question of how do we jump from here, from this context over to the topic of today. And we have to understand, obviously, a lot of the people from Puerto Rico were moving to New York City for economic stability, but there was also cases where, for some, New York City granted a safer or better space for expressing their sexuality. And when I mean safer or better, I mean in comparison to Puerto Rico. Um, it is something that a lot of scholars and historians have discussed uh, for some years already, which have been also the basis for some of the entries that I've been able to work for the project. And basically, it is within these issues that some of these LGBTQ Puerto Ricans were facing as Puerto Ricans, but also as LGBT individuals that led to a more organized activism, especially during the 1980s and the 1990s. And in the 1990s, especially during the context of the AIDS crisis, which also led eventually to a more active presence in the built environment, allowing for, oops, that's the slide I was missing, sorry, including spaces such as cultural spaces, bars, clubs, and the presence of artists and activists also that were aiding not only the issues of the LGBT community, but also of the Puerto Rican community in general. Um, it was something that maybe we'll talk about, maybe we won't. It depends on how the conversation goes. It's also how some of these groups in New York City also ended up collaborating and connecting with some groups as well in Puerto Rico as part of that constant uh, circular or back and forth migration that is still happening today. And one of the best ways to understand placemaking, activism, culture of the Puerto Rican LGBTQ community in New York City, at least in my opinion, is through the example of the Bronx Academy and of Arts and Dance. So I'll pass it over to Charles now so that we can know more. You're muted, Charles. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Andres, and everyone. Thanks for being here. I see. I love those images that you kind of left us with, particularly Antonia Pantoja and Wilhelmina Perry, Dr. Wilhelmina Perry, I believe, has joined us. So it's exciting to have her here. Um, and also, that crew of, Candido Negron and Hector Seda, like those were folks that they were part of our community, of the time of that moment with the Movisiones. Um, so thank you for inviting me. And also, I'm literally at BAAD at the moment. I'm doing this call from BAAD proper. And so yeah, so I think when one of the things to talk about BAAD specifically, well, I'll just I have a couple of slides that I'll share as well as I talk, and then I might share some photographs as well. But I'm gonna share this. So this is the American Banknote Building, which is what is listed on the site as BAAD's original place. Our entrance was actually around the corner from this building, but it's a building that was built in 1911 in the South Bronx. It's like 360,000 square feet or some crazy amount of space like that. But we had in that space, we had about 3,500 square feet in it. And this is kind of like what it looked like when Arthur and I moved into it in 1998. And that's Arthur standing in the space with the warehouse windows that were broken, and we covered them with aluminum foil. That's what you see there. But we were building a home for dance, but we were also building a home for our queerness. We're both Puerto Rican men, but if you know anything about Puerto Ricans, particularly Puerto Ricans in New York, where our embrace is expansive of all the different folks who are here. And I think part of it is because even in ourselves, we are Black, we are white, we are everything in between. And so racially, it's a diverse group of folks. But that was the inside of BAAD. This is another picture of me back in the day in the inside of BAAD. You can see the rough walls and the aluminum foil a little better in this picture. The other photo was done by a professional photographer. There was a group from ICP that was in the Bronx doing things. They photographed Arthur in his space. But we were able to take that space, as you can see in the image, there's a rolling Marley over a parquet dance floor. But later on, we got some stuff together, and this is what the space looked like when we left it after 14 years. We had built the floor, we created a space. You see the windows are different. But one thing that has been consistent from the beginning, whether it was broken windows or a beautiful floor, is that we were creating a home for people who were queer, for people of color, and for women. And that's the basis of BAAD's mission. Um, we were in Hunts Point. That's where that banknote building is in the Bronx for 14 and a half years. And then here's another photograph of that complements the picture with Arthur in the air. And we wanted to do this juxtaposition of beautiful art and queerness in this urban environment. And part of it is because we weren't folks who were parachuting in. Arthur grew up in the Bronx. I've lived in the Bronx my entire life. I was born in Puerto Rico, but I came to the Bronx when I was 3 months old. So I'm from there. But we wanted to create this space in a place that we considered home. and that whether it was going to be embraced, the queerness or not, we were going to be there. And luckily for the 14 and a half years that we were in Hunts Point, also living, because we were a couple at the time and we lived in Hunts Point, we were doing that. But then the situation changed. And so this is where BAAD is. This is at the outside of the building. So as we're talking about queer sites, where queerness happens, where queerness lives, this is one of the places where it currently lives here in the Bronx. And so and there's a picture of Arthur and me in front of it when we first moved in here, branding with our t-shirts. So we knew that BAAD was in a new home. But the last picture I have here, then I'll talk some more, and then maybe I'll share some more photographs, is this image of from Gay Men of the Bronx. And Gay Men of the Bronx was an organization that existed from 1990 till about 2000. And if you do the math, and I'll stop sharing my screen, I'm with the purple bandana if you hadn't figured that out there. And the folks next to me is a gentleman named Thomas Sola. There's another guy named Hector, and I forget what his partner's name, but he called him Duty. So that's what we'll have to be today. We'll be Duty. And those of you who are Puerto Rican know what I'm talking about. So anyway, I'm going to stop sharing for now and come back into the room. But to talk about the idea of Gay Men of the Bronx was a group that was formed by a man named Ron Jacobowitz, and his home is also on the site website. And we were, if you do the math, we began in 1990 at a time when there was a lot of activism happening in the Bronx, happening in New York City, happening because a lot of lives depended on that activism. And so we were organizing to save ourselves, to save our communities, and to try to figure out how to live and love. So, so GMoB was there doing its work in the Bronx, working with the Anti-Violence Project, but also, you know, members of GMoB were members of Gay Men of African Descent. There were also members of Latino Gay Men of New York. They were also part of, later on, GALDE, which is the Dominican group that came to be. There was Las Buenas Amigas. There was and there was a lot of working, and of course, in the Bronx specifically, there was the Bronx Lesbians United in Sisterhood, Blues, and BAAD and Blues worked together. But you know, it's hard in a capsulated hour to talk about a history of activism. But I think what I want to do is share maybe two stories. One, I think I shared with the group when we were talking to get a sense of the commitment and I'll say sacrifice, but also the love and joy that we did. So back in, and I can't remember the year, but it was in the early 90s, there was a murder in the Bronx, and a trans person was murdered near Fordham Road. And so we worked with a person named Juan Mendez, an amazing Puerto Rican activist who was my friend as well, who became my friend. But Juan was an activist. He worked for the Anti-Violence Project. He's Puerto Rican. And he was a DJ, ended up being a writer for El Daily News, and wrote one of the most beautiful stories about the month of June, holding both the Puerto Rican Day Parade and the Queer Pride Parade. And he said it's a month that he walks with the queer fly out of one pocket and the queer flag out of one pocket and the Puerto Rican flag out of the other. And I loved that image. And one year I did that. I marched in the parade after he had passed with the Puerto Rican flag in one pocket and the rainbow flag in the others in his honor. But he came to the South Bronx to a place called St. Anne's Church with Dr. Luis Barrios, who was there as the pastor of that church, and organized what he called the Requiem for Justice. And it was a service in honor of this young person who had been killed. And we went and we marched from 138th Street in the South Bronx all the way up to Fordham Road. And if anybody has any sense of geography in the Bronx, that is a long walk. But there was this energy, there was this reverence, there was this defiance. It was covered in the newspapers. But and that site from St. Anne's Church could be a historical site as well. as a place where queerness lived and where queerness flourished here. That would be one a big story, and there was a lot happening. Then we could talk about the times, but I think I want to talk about. I was going to tell another story, but I realized that was tragic. So I want to tell a happy story about that happened in another site when we wanted to do a party in the Bronx, and so many of us we went to a space called La Peña, and La Peña was on 144th Street, and it was run by this man named Victor and his wife, and they were, I think they were from, I'm gonna say they were from Chile. I think they are from Chile, and they had this cultural space, and it was called Vamos a La Peña, and La Peña is like the rock where the community gathers around, and they let this queer group, and I believe in 1991, have a gay party there. And so we partnered. We partnered with all of the groups that were there, the other Latinx groups, even Gold. There was Gay Officers Action League, a member um, in the Bronx. Pedro lived in the Bronx, Puerto Rican police officer and very active, and he came as well. But you know, to speak specifically, we're speaking specifically. I keep name dropping a lot of the Puerto Ricans that were there, but it was a whole mix of people. Of if you look at the Gay Men of the Bronx, actually, okay, I'm good. I'm looking at the time, so I'm gonna share my screen again because I just want to flash through some pictures from that time, and this is the slideshow that I'm going to try to get rid of. Here we go. There's an X. Second. Of course, oh, there's that. So I'm just going to show some pictures just as I talk. Um, if you look at Gay Men of the Bronx, this is a group here. The guy holding the umbrella is actually Ron Jacobowitz, who's the person we consider the founder. There's a whole group of folks there, but I'm just going to flash through these images and these were all in the 90s, these images of Gay Men of the Bronx. And we were basically trying to find home. And we rented spaces wherever we went. This Steiner, this Bronx State Services, wherever we went, we're constantly finding spaces to make ourselves at home. That's Fire Island. It's not what you beat. So you'll see a butt, but it's okay. We're adults. But here's Pelham Bay Park. So these are just images of us being who we needed to be at that time and being at home in the Bronx and being at home in our borough. And whether it was parks, whether it was, us renting spaces, the whether it's going to the gay bars that were in the Bronx. This is a bar that called GT's that was in the Bronx on Fordham Road. Um, um, we rented the Bronx Dance Theater to host Night of 12 Gowns. But really, it was a tough time. It was a dark time because many of the people you see in these images are no longer with us, but there was also a lot of joy and a lot of living and surviving. So I think I'll stop sharing the screen. So I just wanted to flash some pictures so that we could see some of the faces and bring some of the energy into the space as we're talking about queerness and activism and the importance of place. And those people helped us build BAAD as well. So those early days, the people that came and helped to clean the floors and to help create that other space were many of the men from Gay Men of the Bronx, including Mrs. Ross, who was 102 years old this year, but she was in her 70s back then, came to help us, and Arthur's dancers and people in the community. But they were all helping us create a home and create a space that now is 25 years of holding space in the Bronx for queer folks. So that's what I'll share from my experience and my history. And I can speak to Andres, and we can all talk together about the importance of place and the importance of homes and places, whether they're permanent, temporary, or as we call today, pop-ups.
I think I'll jump up from that comment that you just said, and I'm gonna start asking you a question.
Mhm.
And it's considering the work that the project has done, what does it mean to you to identify places for the future generations, especially in the current climate that we're at?
Mm. I think that's something that's become very real to me now, right? Because you have to think when I began BAAD, I was the younger part of a kind of middle age, but younger generation. I was like 33 or 34 years old, right? So so for me, it was, we were just doing, but for now, having sometimes been in the space and having somebody who is like 21 years old come here and perform and knowing that the place we began doing this before that person even existed, right, on the earth as a human being anyway, and now they're here, right? So for me, it's not lost how significant that is to have this kind of space. I mean, we're having this conversation after this election that we had, right? And so the sense of place, and so it's just not about a home, right? It's about like what happens in that home, right? And so for me, it's just very empowering when I feel queer people come through BAAD and say, for the first time, and say it feels like home. And I ask them now, what do you mean? They're like, I don't just feel relaxed. I feel embraced. I feel like I can be who I need to be. And we know that we used to call BAAD an elsewhere, like you come, right? It's an elsewhere, but it's not an elsewhere because it exists in the world, right? And so there are other places that may have that. So I think the significance is that I think that we need spaces in which we can feel that sense of freedom, feel that sense of creativity and value. I think that's important that we feel valued, right? So okay,
Yes, and
you can
no, go ahead, go ahead.
no, I mean I also get distracted by the chat because people put things in the chat and I keep looking in the chat. No, I think so I think I love this conversation because and hearing your presentation as well, looking, the sense of migration to do that sense of couching, right? And I think the importance of part of the migration is not only economic but also freedom, right? So I think that's that other thing, that other aspect is very important as well. So, and I'm just like wondering, I'm like fascinated, like why you were interested in historic sites. Like this is a cross-generation conversation. I can talk about history, but I'm like, here you are, and you're all immersed in this. And so what's your motivation, I think, or what's your attraction to doing this work?
I mean, particularly, I think there's various layers to answer that question. Particularly in the aspect of wanting to understand more our history from the LGBT community, history in the sense of the Puerto Rican community in New York City, and that in between as well. Uh, because at least in my case, I didn't know that much about the LGBT community here in Puerto Rico until a year before I went to New York for my master's. And it was even a continuing learning process while I was in New York, learning more about the community and even more so migration, which is ironic considering that almost everyone here in Puerto Rico will have a family member that has migrated to the United States, but we don't learn that history in terms of migration. And I feel like I should mention the fact that I had the opportunity to do that merging of both LGBT history and Puerto Rican history with a project that I did with professor and co-director Andrew Dolcart for a class in the master's program, where I explored firstly sites of the LGBT community in Puerto Rico, and then as I continued, I started noticing that there was a lot of connections with the Puerto Rican community in New York City, and a lot of intersections with it. And it was just very interesting to just learn more about that history that we usually don't learn a lot about unless you look for it, because the information is there. It's just having to dive into the books, into the articles that people have written, and I don't know. It's just exciting to learn more. At least for me, I love history, so it's very exciting for me to just learn more about about the communities, especially with the work I've continued to do with the project as well. So it's just an opportunity to learn more and also share more of that information, uh, so that more people from our generation can also have that available as well. I don't know, it's just
Mhm.
exciting.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, I tend to love research and history as well. I mean, I think from what you're saying, I think, you know, I try to think of like, what's the importance of this? Like, why? Why, and I'm going to start from where I ended off when I was speaking value, right? There's a sense of like understanding history and value and depth with that. I think we can also, clearly we know one of the things you can always learn from history, you know, and I think that's part of what I'm calling on right now, in this moment in time. You know what I mean? Like, how do you persevere? Like, only, um, LGBT history, the AIDS pandemic. I figure I know that I'm alive, as an HIV positive person, I'm alive because of the activism that was happening back then, right? Many didn't make it, but many of us did, and that was because of the activism of the understanding how we were not valued, or how we were valued or not, by power, and how we had to take you know, matters into our own hands. And I think the same thing in terms of like, over time it has looked differently. I'll slip into a little thing right now because you're talking about how we both love history. Like, right now, what inspires me as a writer, I mean, I'm also a writer, is all the new work I'm doing. I'm doing this collection of stories that are about Puerto Rico. They're set in Puerto Rico with a connection to the Bronx. So there is that natural connection. And so there's a story that is based in 1935 in Ponce, and they're all queer love stories, right? Or queer relation stories, right? So it's for me in a sense, I'm asking you because I feel like in a way, in a modest way, I have a lived history, right? I think you do too, but I have more of a lived history, right? Here's the cross-generational part, right? I have a lived history that's a little longer than yours, right? But then there are other people even I can tell, Dr. Perry has an even longer lived history, right? And from her perspective or from others' perspectives, or Mrs. Ross was 102, like she has a longer lived history where there are moments, right, that, for instance, I have students when I at Ostos who are in their 20s, right? And so they didn't live through the AIDS pandemic. They didn't even, I think, if I do the math, they didn't even experience 9/11, right? But but there for them, the history is a learned and trying to learn from that, and for many of us, a lived one. So anyway, I'll just go back to the value of history. It's like how we learn, how we experience, but also this, sense of value and sense of worth that we get from knowing
Yeah.
what our past is.
Yeah, I think that's what interests me because it's just this aspect of knowing, for example, in the case here in Puerto Rico, that uh there's always been a presence. There's always been spaces, clubs, bars in different spaces, in different places in throughout Puerto Rico. The information is there. You just have to dive very deeply into the archives that actually have the information. And it's just so interesting identifying some of those places, but also how some of the people, uh, like the amount of visibility that the community has now is because of the work of previous generations, as you were mentioning, and even some of the sites that Amanda was mentioning earlier are an example of that. I mean, if we go way back over to the example of Antonia Pantoja, obviously she migrated mostly because of financial reasons. It wasn't necessarily the same example as Manuel Ramos Otero, who migrated explicitly because of his sexual orientation. But at the end of the day, she was also a person who decided not to uh, reveal her public life, mostly because of the fact that she didn't want to affect the institutions and basically the legacy of the institutions that she developed for the Puerto Rican youth. Obviously, it was a different time, uh, but it also goes to show how some of the work of the community, including way back as the 1940s and 1960s with Antonia Pantoja, to the most recent example as Homovisiones, have all made it possible for us to have that visibility and be able to learn more of that history instead of having to, uh, I don't know, each and one individually have to do the research. At least the project like this allows for that visibility and for people to know more about our history. So I think yeah, it's very meaningful, and and again, it's just exciting doing that research and learning more of all the people that put their work in basically to be in this stage right now.
Yes. I think also something you said, and Amanda, I'm not sure in terms of time. Oh, some people are emailing me privately. I'm getting quite, that's what this, that's what it is. So yes, I'm not sure, Amanda, with the chat, if we'll have access to it, but someone sent me their email and I'm gonna, um, but anyway, but going back to what you were talking about, I think, one of the things I want to pick up is that we all kind of do our part, right? I mean, we're doing this during Puerto Rican Heritage Month. We're specifically talking about sites that, were either founded or created by Puerto Ricans, but they were created not in a vacuum and not in a silo, but they were created in community with people who were, Puerto Ricans and not, and other Latinidades, other, with Black folks, with white folks, they were creating that kind of space. I love us talking about, you know, um, queerness and outness at different moments in history, like, the New York Poets Cafe, we know it, right? But, you know, the same thing, that image of Victor Cándido Negrón and Hector Seda in that picture, but he's sitting with Miguel Agarín, right? So in the New York Poets Cafe. So sometimes, I always think of Emmanuel Xavier, the poet, because I felt like he was kind of like the child, the child of the New Rican, the queer child, the outspoken queer child, but I think he, of course, came at a much later time when he was able to do that. But going back to that idea is that we all do our part, right? And it's kind of not to sound too kumbaya, but it's like a fabric, right? A quilt of activism that was happening, and Puerto Ricans were definitely a part of it and continue to be a part of it, whether it's in activism or writing or the creation of homes and spaces. That that's an important part to highlight. And I agree that it's so important to that, not only to know it, because I think where's a lot of the archives live, and I think still with queerness, and particularly I think more Puerto Rican stories, more POC stories need more spaces to be archived, because right now, I mean, I've shared one of the projects I want to work on is Gay Men of the Bronx. A lot of the archive is living in this body and in this memory. And so how do we take this archive, out of this body and this memory, whether it's a book, however it's going to exist, so that other generations, Andres, can find it, right? And continue to learn from it. So yes.
Yeah.
Just okay, go ahead.
No, I think I just wanted to make a small comment because you mentioned, Amanda also mentioned it before, that it's Puerto Rican Heritage Month. And I think it's important to know that it's not only Puerto Rican Heritage Month, but also today is the day of the discovery of Puerto Rico. So it's also very interesting to have this conversation today when it's usually, uh, well, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole, but I just wanted to mention that as well.
And I don't know if people can hear it, but I can hear that coqui in the background.
Yeah.
So just in the comments, someone asked me what happened to Arthur Aviles. Arthur Aviles is what right now he's in Puerto Rico, but he'll be back tomorrow. So Arthur, they said they lost track of him in the 80s. But Arthur, yes, we formed Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance. He was in one of the photographs in the space. He's the co-founder of here, and he continues to create dance and art. And we, as Andres asked me earlier, that feeling, what does it feel, the significance of the space, and for us to be able to continue to hold a space for queer artists and queer people to come, not only create art but experience it, is continues to be vital and important. So Arthur is very much a part of BAAD.
And there's also a question here. Can you please tell us more about how we can get involved in organizations within the NYC queer Puerto Rican space? There's more to be done, and I would love to get involved. So, Charles, if you have ideas.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of BAAD, I want to say yes, that Arthur and I are both Puerto Ricans and we created it. So it's not an exclusively Puerto Rican space. It's a POC, Latinx, Black, but it's definitely queer as well. So we own that. part, but not singularly queer either, because we also embrace POC in the broad sense. But for BAAD, our website, I could put it in the chat, is www.badbronx.org. I mean, we're going, speaking of queer Puerto Rican, I know I just said we're not exclusively queer Puerto Rican space. We have Los Nutcrackers, a queer Puerto Rican holiday play that we're doing for the year number 21, opening on December 6th. And we'll be doing that show from December 6th to the 14th. But I'll put our website in the chat. And so one way you can just go on our website and find a way to connect with us. Definitely come see a show. That's or if you have some specific skill or talent that you want to offer, let us know that. If you're an artist, if anybody here is an artist, and that is super accessible to work here and present work here. It really begins with a conversation or an email, and we reach out and we begin speaking on about how we could support your work. But yeah, that's how there's so much. There's a lot that BAAD does. I didn't really talk about our programs. So we do festivals and we do special talks called Courageous Conversations. We have a project where we partner with restaurants and we do something called Trans Visionaries, where we present trans and gender nonconforming artists in restaurants. So there's different ways that you could get involved. But again, when we're thinking about BAAD physical space, BAAD goes out into the community with space. BAAD claims space for a night at a restaurant. And, for that night, whatever it is, what restaurant have we gone to? Wait, that's gay anyway. Choco Bar Cortez, we've taken it, that becomes, the owner's gay. But so that's other things we can do. Gay-owned restaurants could be on the sites. But one thing to talk about too, since we're talking about the Bronx, and again, I'm gonna let Amanda lead us. But one of the things that I did not get to experience in the Bronx was a place called the Apartment El Apartamento, and I think we talked about that, possibly coming up into a site. But it was a space that they said it was amazing, and everybody who talks about it, it was a basically Latino club. They played a lot of Hispanic music, salsa, etc. But they always talk about how there was so much energy, and the place was not maybe the most stable place. That when they danced, they always felt the floor moving. You know what I mean? The floor swaying along with them. So as we continue to look at site, and examine and document the history, I think, and we talked about this too, about the sites where people went to dance and to celebrate. And there were several of them that have existed in the Bronx and throughout the city, in addition to La Escuelita and to the places friends. Those have been longstanding places. Bronx hasn't had a longstanding place that I know of, but there's been many spaces who have lived for short lives, but have lived super vibrantly. So maybe they came, they exploded, and then they, what do you call those? I don't even call those rocket birthday candles that always startle me at a restaurant. The flames come out and then they kind of wither away, and then the stick, you just get the smoke. So maybe that could be the history of the Bronx queers us party site. The flames and the embers.
Yeah, I know you talked about the club scene in the 90s and looking at a number of spaces like the Warehouse and Apartamento. And it's for those sites, it's always really great to hear from people who have experienced, had been there, to get those voices on record, because otherwise it can be difficult to document these histories. Some people who are some sites are easier to find than others through archival resources. So if anyone here tonight does have memories of those spaces or spaces that you feel our project should record on our website, we'd love to hear from you. And I already did from someone. Yeah, so that is definitely something we would like to add to the Bronx, those kinds of sites. And actually, Andrés is that he's written 2 more sites for us that are in the process of being added to the website, one for Mario Montez and another for Victor Fragoso. So those will be up in the next few weeks or so.
Yes.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for our speakers? Andrew? Oh, thought you unmuted yourself. Okay. But yeah, this was really great. Charles, I remember you saying recently that you had, I believe, a documentary about Antonia Pantoja at BAAD a few years ago or something, and you had not realized that she was part of the LGBTQ community. And I was wondering, for someone who is such a big figure in the Puerto Rican community, what it meant to discover that part of her identity, and if you connected with her in a new way.
Well, I'll just say I knew that she was a part of it, but
Oh,
when we wanted to do the documentary, we didn't know, and we were worried that it would have been taken out, but it wasn't.
okay.
And it was in there, and even that's when I met Dr. Wilhelmina Perry when she came to the screening of it, to talk about it afterward. And so, but I think, I think for me, it was super important. I'm just saying with Miguel Agarin, because like Miguel Agarin, I did not know, right? And so, but I knew he was one of the figures of the New York Post Cafe. Miguel Piñero, we knew because they made the movie Piñero, and then they put that in there. Not in the nicest way, I think, anyway. But 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 I did not know. And this is like he's gone, so I guess I could do the story. I found out because he was flirting with me, and I was like, what if the other guy didn't do flirting with me? I was so taken aback. But that's how I found out. But then I felt so wonderful. I was like, oh my God, one of the founders of the New York Post Cafe was also, I think he identified as bisexual. I think he may have ultimately identified as bisexual. So but I think so, let's talk about that, like how important it is, I would say not only you know, for us to see ourselves, right? And I think it's really important. And I think that's another importance of history, right? And that sense of value for us to be able to see ourselves. And they say it. I mean, I could just say there's a million studies. I could probably direct you to some, because I've looked them up because I've had to write grants for BAAD to justify what we do. But they say that when you see yourself represented positively, right, in art, in culture, in popular media, that there's a sense of self-value, right? And that's a little different than self-esteem. Self-value is talking about your worth, right? And so when we see ourselves reflected in history, when we see ourselves reflected, in the sites, right, that people have done some things, it just in general creates a sense of worth. So the same thing with queerness. I think, for years, goodness, I will talk about my own history. How do we shed that legacy of shame, right? The shame that constantly gets passed down. How do you shed it? You shed it by showing the power and showing the worth, right? So showing that all of those messages, you got that part wrong. That's not who I am, right? Like I'm amazing, I'm powerful, I'm strong, I contribute. And I could say that not only for me, but I could say that because there's a whole history. And so if anything else, that's what I feel sometimes when you were talking about Andres, with some of the younger people that come through BAAD, that sense of thank you for creating this space. Thank you and I hear that thank you coming to me and coming to all the others who have done things, right? Because it kind of is a little bit of a shortcut. They have a space to come to, right? They can become inspired and create their own spaces, right? And create more spaces and other spaces. So yes, I think that's an important thing because it really feeds our work. And when we see that, we find out that, that's why, when they're doing all this queer history stuff, they're like, Alexander the Great was gay or bi, whatever. I guess, yes, oh my God, even him, right? So but I think it just gives that really expansiveness. And it validates what we're saying, that we're everywhere. We have been everywhere and we have always been, right? So I think that's another part of all of this that's so luscious about this history.
Yeah,
Agreed.
and I think that's something also like at least in my case, jumping over for those 2 years for the masters, just being able to identify more that history. Uh, I didn't know if I was gonna be there for 2 years or more. So learning more about the history of the Puerto Rican community and Puerto Rican LGBT community also helped me to be it helped like grounding myself in that entire experience of being away from home. And I think it's also important just in that sort of situation of just learning more about how much more people came before you, uh,
Mm.
and leaving that legacy, at least in the built environment, of knowing where they were or where some certain events happened. I think it's something very important. And yeah.
Right. There's a in the chat, there's a shout out to Sylvia Rivera, and
Yeah.
it's so interesting. So yes, we have to like so I'm trying to say this without being too so I have a play that I've written we're actually gonna do next year called The Happy Hour. And in it, like Sylvia comes out and she comes out toward the end and she's like, "You're not telling the story without me," right? I feel in a way, as we're coming down, if we're landing today, that putting the shout out to Sylvia is her always reminding us, you're not telling the story without me. Such an important person and activist and Puerto Rican activist. We were talking about that, her um, involvement with the Young Lords and how she was got involved, and it was polemic sometimes because the Young Lords, there was also this sense of macho that existed in the Young Lords. I mean, Edith Morales, who is amazing, talked about that, has shared that with me, but also did that amazing documentary, but did an event celebrating just the women of the Young Lords. And so it was important to bring that in there. But Sylvia Rivera also, as a trans woman, wanted to be involved and was involved with some of the bumps and bruises that caused. But yeah, it's like it's part of our history as I'll say as Puerto Ricans, navigating this. I mean, there's a lot of power and a lot of joy, but there's also a lot of tragedy.
Mhm.
So we have to be able to hold them both. Not like, and for me, not let the tragedy take over, but acknowledge that
Yeah.
it's there and it's a part of it. And there's stuff I want to write about Puerto Rico también, but it's the darker stuff. I don't think I'm that ready to write about dark. I want to write about love, right?
Makes sense. It's a lot to get. We are the same at our project. We're a small group and we have all these sites and people and groups that we want to document on the website. And on any given day, you could focus on 10 different things. And so, but it's important to get around to all these things. But yeah, it would be great to obviously, Charles, get your thoughts on the page. This way, those stories are preserved
Hmm.
for the next generation. Yeah. So I guess we've
I have a question,
yeah.
Charles. This is Ken. I'm one of the co-directors. Are there any organized efforts to document the history that you're talking about in the Bronx? Not just queer history or Puerto Rican, or just are there oral history projects that are focusing on the Bronx that that people are aware of, or queer ones or Puerto Rican ones, given the kind of current state of eradication of information, it would be a great opportunity to figure out how to do something. I'm not giving you another project, but it's just
Mm.
so needed,
Yeah.
as demonstrated in the research that our graduate students have done. Cecilia Hall's here, and Andres.
I mean, I will say that, for me, it was important to have the oral history done at Centro, where they did it with me and they've done it with there are other queer people that are a part of that. Specifically for the Bronx, no, I mean, that I want to write this memoir slash historical history book, but um, that will be one. I think the Bronx County Historical Society was doing some events. They're small, but Stephen Payne over there has been doing some work. I met with him about the idea of an archive of where could we, host it. I mean, I have a lot of material from Gay Men of the Bronx. I know other people do, but these are like flyer. Okay, the other thing too that's important is that we have to think a lot of this organizing that was done in the 90s, like the internet was not what it is now. So if you Google gay men of the Bronx, if you Google Latino gay men of New York, if you Google a lot of the organizations, you don't get a lot of information, right? There's not a lot of information there. So you're right, Ken. In a way, how do we preserve, this outside of also academia, because that's another place that has some archives. But outside of academia, how does and yeah, and books, and it's so wild because you have to think of how do people get their information, these days. Like I don't know, maybe we should do a TikTok oral history so that as long as TikTok exists. But no, I not that I know of, and if anyone else knows of any projects that are happening in terms of oral histories or documenting histories of the Bronx, um, I welcome it. But I know Stephen Payne at the Bronx County Historical Society is open to it, and so they're creating an archive.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much. I was trying to just seeing if there was any other comments. Charles, you mentioned you got some, but maybe those are private messages for you. So I don't know if any.
Just one or two, not many. I don't want to make it sound like
Okay.
my chat was blowing up.
It's hard for me to follow what's going on in the chat and talk. And all these years we've been doing Zoom, I still can't quite do both at once. The multitasking is hard. So
that's a great. I mean, I see that Ken put that link in the chat about the grant for Latinos and heritage conservation.
oh yeah, Andres sent it to us last week. So yeah, that was good to see.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting how that histories could be archived, right? Because we think about oral histories, but you know, um, theater and writing and performance are different ways that, I love the play. It's not a queer history, but you know, Aloha Boricua that Pregones did. I remember going to that play and learning so much about the Puerto Rican migration to Hawaii, and so there's different ways in which people can archive history, so yes, let's look at the archives, let's look at the ways we can conserve it, but are there any creative folks who want to join up in that expression of archiving a history, like in terms of how do you write a play, how do you create a documentary, how do you, that's another way that would be powerful to to have our histories.
Agreed. Oops, did I miss someone from the chat?
What's that?
Thank you. No, I thought I missed something from the chat because it disappeared from me for a second. Well, thank you both so much. On this Discovery Day, we've discovered the queer history of Puerto Rico and New York, as always, looking deeper and reinterpreting and looking at history with a new lens, seeing what's been left out is a big part of what we do. And so thank you for joining us tonight to raise awareness and visibility of queer Puerto Rican contributions to New York City and through these historic sites and places. Thank you all so much. And we hope all of you will continue following us through social media, check out our website, check out BAAD. And thank you all for the comments coming in response to this program.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us. Take care.
Take care.